Welcome to another episode of this program, and I have another incredible guest here with me today. You know, I'm constantly scouring the world for the very best of leaders who can talk on this subject of human-centered leadership, something that's a real passion of mine. And when we bring about change in organizations, we're living through some really incredible times, I think, certainly over the last couple of years since the pandemic and everything else that's happened as a result and since then. And I think, you know, the world is crying out for a different kind of leadership, a different kind of culture within organizations, within societies. So today's guest understands all of that. Andrew Stotter-Brooks has got a lifetime of experience in learning and development, leadership development, and currently is vice president of Etihad. Etihad, for those of you who haven't traveled, I've traveled on Etihad. It is one of the best airlines out there, really is. I feel special, Andrew. When I go on Etihad, I feel special. The staff are amazing. The planes just feel that bit better. It's an experience when you go on Etihad, and you have the incredible task, really, of being vice president of learning and development at Etihad. So I guess this experience that customers have when they interact with Etihad is something at the forefront of your training and all your strategies that you set. Would that be right?
It would. You know, for us, it's about keeping it human. We talk a lot about being, you know, thoughtful. We talk a lot about being caring. We talk a lot about being human, and I think that's very important. We work in quite a regulated industry, as you can imagine, and safety and being the safest airline in the world is very important to us. We're very privileged that we work for such an amazing organisation and based out of Abu Dhabi, which is just an incredible place to be kind of part of. At the same time, it's very much around trying to, you know, you've got the technology, you've got the, you know, we fly the latest aeroplanes, the most, you know, sustainably friendly aeroplanes. We have a very clear vision to kind of to show the world how incredible Abu Dhabi is. But a lot of that it's still at the end of the day, at the real kind of like sharp pointy end, it's still a guest interacting with one of our incredible team members. So I think that's really, really important. And the more clarity that we can give those individuals, the easier it becomes for them to be able to be human at work and, you know, and interact with the guests and make the guests feel like they're the only person on the planet, really. So yeah, it's a nice compliment. Thank you very much. We try very hard to look after our guests.
I love the fact that you talk about it all being about being human. What does being human mean to you?
I suppose it's about being authentic. There's a huge difference between, you know, human doing and human being, and I know probably human doing isn't a word, but you know, human doing is really the technical side of our job, what we actually do day to day. And I think sometimes people get confused with that. So with a sector like aviation, the airline industry, it's obviously, and rightfully so, it's completely full of compliance and regulation, and that's make us the safest airline in the world, which is 100% correct. The other side of that is mixing that incredible product and that incredible safety, but actually bringing in that kind of human side of it. So it's the emotional side of it. It's the way that we connect with people. So we know that human beings need 4 things from us. They need to be, I think fundamentally, they need to be respected. They need to feel that they're being heard. They need to feel that they're being acknowledged, and they definitely need to feel that they're being remembered. I would almost go back to saying that if we can remember the guest, it's amazing. And definitely within the way that our world works is that we often, if you look at our guest service agents and the guys who are obviously the cabin crew, the team on the flight deck, those guys are in a fairly unique position for a couple of reasons. First of all, they do it every day. That's the first thing. Most of the guests that they're coming into contact with, perhaps it's quite a unique experience for them. There are a few exceptions to that. You know, I travel quite frequently myself, but many of the guests don't really travel that frequently. Maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. So they're kind of quite familiar with the processes. And there's an opportunity. I mean, I think one of the magic things that we can do is we can, what I would say, anticipate need. So being able to almost predict what a customer needs from us is amazing, and just keeping it really, really human. So honestly, it's just simple things. And of course, you know, there's a great Coveyism or Coveyism, depending on how you pronounce your surname. But you know, for me, fundamentally, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
I love that. Yeah.
If you lead with care, It's amazing. You can just get away with so much more, really. And I think people are more open to if you then make a mistake. I mean, gosh, nobody makes mistakes more than I do. But if you make a mistake, I think people are a bit more forgiving of you. So if you genuinely come to interactions with a genuine, authentic sense that you want to really help and you genuinely care about somebody, it's amazing. And I would go further than that because there is actually it's a bit like a recipe. And I often talk about people say obviously obviously there's the highfalutin terminology of neuro linguistic programming. I'm sure your listeners, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of NLP. But in the simplest form, NLP really is just following a recipe. And so if you can actually if you think about how you bake a cake, you might take a recipe off the World Wide Web, and you might then go and buy the ingredients. You might even watch a famous chef like Jamie, or someone who's done this quite regularly, and they bake the cake, and you kind of watch them step by step. And the reality is, if you actually follow a really good recipe and you have the right ingredients and the right equipment, actually you can probably get you're pretty close to a world-class cake, pretty close to a world-class chef. And I would then argue if you repeated that recipe continuously, what you'll actually find is that over time, you may even get better than the world-class chef. If you did that recipe time and time and time again, you might actually bring in some of your own kind of personality into the cake. It would probably be a pretty amazing product. So actually, I think starting with, getting some basic recipe on what it means to be human, giving some clarity around what it means to be human, and then asking the team to follow it, not in necessarily a robotic approach. I worked for Starbucks. I was head of learning for Starbucks for a number of years, and it was interesting. We had a very very strong kind of like process points of service when we're trying to help our team members, our baristas, our sort of service assistants actually work with our guests, with our customers. And you can get to a point where you can actually be quite regimented with the way you approach the guest. And I would suggest that it's almost a case of sort of dialing it back. Sometimes if you're really trying to create that interaction, it has to be authentic, it has to be real, it has to be human. And as I said, it's back to those simple things. People need to be respected, they need to be remembered, they need to be heard, they need to be acknowledged. You can do those things. And by following a recipe, by working around a very loose kind of recipe on how you might go about doing that, and giving people some tools around that, it can be quite transformational.
I think that's incredible what you've just said there. I just want to try and unpick some of that really, because there's so many truth bombs within there, so much depth within there, and a lot of wisdom within there, to be quite honest, Andrew. So, you talk about, people just want to be seen and heard and appreciated. I often talk about, I think the four tenets for people and talent in organizations to feel that they belong is that they are seen, heard, valued and appreciated. And we often talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think the one thing that's happened, over the last couple of years is that wherever we sat on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 2020, when the pandemic came along, put everyone right back down to the bottom tier of food, water, safety, security. So the most basic physiological needs. And I think a lot of us are still there. So there was a recalibration of priorities within people's mindsets. And when they're looking to the organization or the team that they want to work in, they want to feel safe. They want to feel psychologically safe. And this is a new terminology that's, a lot of people are talking about right now. What does it mean to be psychologically safe? And I think everything that you've talked about there, being human, is at the heart of it all. Traditionally, I don't think organizations focus so much on their leadership and their psyche being about being human, centered around the humanness of it all. And I think, certainly with everything that you've described, both in Starbucks and in Etihad, I'd like to think that many, many other organizations are taking some lessons from that and saying, hey, do you know what? Maybe this is the future. Maybe this is the fifth industrial revolution that we very often talk about, the meeting of minds, machines and people. What does that look like going forward? So I think you're so right. I think you've hit the nail on the head really around the humanness of it all. But in order for us to be human, I think there's a couple of things that need to come about. And one of those is about having a strong ability to build trust and to build relationships. Now, whether that's inside the organization or externally focused to other stakeholders, maybe clients and customers of the organization, relationship building skills are critical. And that's sort of what I do when I look at culture change in organizations and do leadership development, is how do we build true, honest, deep relationships that are have a foundation of trust? What sort of work have you been involved in, either in Etihad, Starbucks, or elsewhere? I mean, you've worked all over the place. What sort of tips, techniques would you suggest, or have you seen what strategies could be followed to build that?
I'll give you two brilliant recipes. One of the provenance of one of them, I'm slightly embarrassed to admit. Let's come to that in a couple of seconds. But it's unfortunately that particular recipe. I'm a huge believer in following recipes. It sounds really crazy, because if you were watching me execute a recipe, you wouldn't necessarily know. And whenever I kind of like, when I then sort of divulge the recipe, I always feel a little bit like a fraud, Carl. I genuinely do.
You and me both.
Because people go, oh, I've been kind of like conned, I've been tricked by a very polished kind of trickster when I'm building relationships with people. But there's two things. And I think my dad also is. God rest his soul, he's not with us any longer. My dad taught me a lot of things, and definitely those kind of 4 human needs. My dad was really kind of like big on that. But I would say it's really, really simple. So there's kind of 5 things that we all need to really focus on as humans. If you really want to interact really rapidly with another human, first recipe, 5 things, really simple. And I always hold up my hand, because I think it's really important that we kind of focus on those sort of 5 things. First one is, don't underestimate the power of eye contact and smiling.
Yes.
I work in a culture where perhaps people might say, eye contact. We should be doing eye contact. But, again, if you go back to my earlier comments around caring, I think people kind of move on from that. And I can tell lots of stories about that. Maybe I might even divulge a couple in a second. But so really good eye contact and really good smiling is excellent. So I had this kind of rule of like 10-5. So I would say that, eye contact with everyone within 10 feet of me, and then smile with everyone in 5 feet of me.
I love that.
It's really, really clear. So, again, an understanding kind of what the difference between 5 and 10 feet is. So I can make eye contact with you probably over 15 meters, and you'd probably know that I was looking at you, and you can make connection, right? It's really amazing. Don't underestimate it, because human beings primarily communicate non-verbally, as we both know. So therefore, and people underestimate the power of listening with the eyes. Because you can listen with the eyes, you can read so much from a person, and I sound like some confidence picture here. I'm genuinely not.
But it's so true. If you're going to actively listen, active being the key word here. It is not just about listening to the individual; it's showing them that you're listening to them as well.
I always sort of jump in and say it's kind of aggressively listen. So aggressively listening for me, leaning into the conversation, nodding, taking notes, paraphrasing, summarizing, using language that my sorry for me to use the expression, but my kind of mark is using. So if people use a particular type of parlance, a particular word, I would definitely replicate that word, because it then builds. People talk a lot about mirroring and communicating, and building rapport. But for me, if I'm mirroring, I'm not only mirroring on the level of body language. I'm definitely mirroring around tonality, and I'm definitely mirroring around my specific parlance.
To be honest, I actually feel that mirroring language and mirroring tonality can be more powerful.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So so it's definitely smiling and eye contact. There's no substitution in the universe for a warm welcome. So my number 2 would be a warm welcome. My number 3 is always going to be, what do you need, Tal? An offer of assistance is really, really important. There's usually then a kind of a gap where the person kind of responds to you. The magic for me, and it's so simple, Tal, just people don't get it. But the magic for me is then the kind of the what else question. So I would go, number 1, it's really developing eye contact and smiling ability. Number 2, it's about that really genuine kind of open body language, kind of a warm welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever. How are you today? A warm welcome, and a basic offer of assistance. What do you need? Then basically what else question, or what else do you need from me? Is there anything else you need? My name is Andrew. If there's anything else you need from me in this situation, let me know. And then what I would call a fond farewell. So a personalized goodbye. So those kind of 5 points, I'll re-summarize it for you. So again, number one is eye contact and smiling. 10-5. I think that's really important. So generally eye contact at 10 feet, smiling at 5 feet, and then literally a warm welcome, an offer of assistance, a what else question after the interaction, and then basically a final kind of fond farewell is really important. So that's kind of recipe number one. Major on that. The second one, again, it's a slightly dodgy provenance, so please forgive me, but as a sort of 15, 16-year-old boy, I probably wanted what most 15 or 16-year-old boys wanted to do, which was, sorry for my crudeness here, but talking to ladies. I had this kind of strong desire to want to engage with ladies, and I didn't really know how to do it. So a bit of a strange character that I am. I kind of bought a book. That book gave me a bit of a recipe. Little did I know at the time when I was reading that book that it would lay the kind of foundation for my ability to connect and build relationships with people. So in the book, it said there's effectively 4 steps. If you want to talk to a young lady, there are effectively four stages in that conversation. So these are aptly named what I would call the 4 E's. So there are 4 E's. We had 5 before, now we're down to 4. The 4 E's. So you need to be thinking about what I would call in the book's reference to what we call an entry question. So an entry question is by definition, an entry question is something like tell me, explain to me, describe to me. It's a question that is very, very easy to answer. So any early kind of question needs to be really easy to answer. Oh, what are you up to today? How was your day? That kind of stuff. Usually followed by aggressive listening. It's also much more useful, and I think this is a tip I kind of added. It's not part of my 4 E's, but it's don't underestimate the power of compliments.
Very true.
I'm quite a present kind of chap, but I'm very observant. So I tend to, when I ever talk about people using the power of compliments, don't underestimate the critical nature of sincerity. You have to be genuine. So if you're gonna give someone a compliment, it has to be very, very genuine. So normally, if I wanted to talk to a stranger in a queue or on a bus, I know that there's a recipe that can kind of get the fire started, get the conversation started, and it's really amazing. So it works like you wouldn't believe. I mean, I have been practicing it for 45, 50 years now. In all fairness, but when you do it, so you pay your genuine compliment, then you immediately follow it up with a good solid entry question. Or maybe even soften the entry question with something like, I hope you don't mind, Kul, but perhaps you could, what are you doing here today? Wow, so I'm using very softening language, body language. And then the second E is then listening to what I would call experience. I'm using their language. I'm using how they're responding. If I'm getting very negative, closed responses to my very open questions, I tell you what, I just disengage immediately. There's no point in flogging a dead horse. Do you know what I mean? I'm just going. I'm pulling out of the engagement. I'm not going to go for it. There's no point. But I have to say, the rate is higher than 99 out of 100 will be very engaged, because people generally like a compliment because they think a lot about what they're wearing, how they look, where they are.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Then you basically ask them a nice simple question that's easy to answer, an entry question. And then you listen aggressively or actively, it's probably a better term, but I prefer the word aggressively. So when you're listening, you're nodding, you're leaning into the conversation, you're then mimicking, using the same types of language, you're using their words back to them. So that's the E is the entry, the E is the experience. Very, very small doses of the third E. The third E is what I would call enhance the conversation. If I felt it was appropriate, share just a tiny bit about myself in that situation, because don't underestimate people like them. So people like them. So if there's a perception that they like you or they're similar to you, then it tends to open up. And then, of course, finally, is the final E, which is the what I call my engaging E, my final E, and that's really asking for what I want. If I, of course, start with an engaging question, for example, can I have your phone number? Go, laugh, haha. If I ask that first question, can I have your phone number? I walked up to sorry to use that kind of language, but a lady in a bar, can I have your phone number? I'm not going to get a yes. I'm going to get pretty much get closed down. But if you ask that question at the end of you do you pay a small compliment, you do an entry question, you listen to the experience, you get the conversation going, you throw in a tiny bit about yourself, don't hijack the conversation about you, tiny bit about yourself, and then basically ask for the phone number, the engage question. And it's the same with customer service. So actually, if you just think about it a bit more logically and you follow a recipe, I spend my life teaching people to juggle, and juggling is amazing. I love juggling. I've been juggling for. I performed at Covent Garden in London. I was a street performer for a few years of my life, at the early part of my life. Juggling, unicycle of death, that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting because obviously engaging with a crowd and talking to a crowd is quite fun. But juggling is a very interesting thing because I'm not sure whether you juggle, Carl. Ever tried to juggle?
No, I think I can juggle one orange.
One orange. I love juggling. It's I've taught tens of thousands of people how to juggle, and it's great. And then again, I'm going to go back. I'm not like a scratch record, but it's a recipe, right? So you're following when I'm juggling, I follow a recipe. The interesting thing about juggling is that the way that most people's minds are set up is that we all learn through experiences, and those experiences kind of etch into our minds. I'm being very, very literal here, so so please forgive me, but they kind of like they leave a kind of like a scar. So as you have an experience, that kind of lays down some like type of a scar, and then of course once that scar has been formed, that kind of groove has been formed, you tend to jump back to that behaviour. So most people, of course, have a particular preference about how they do something, and that then feeds into all this kind of stuff around change. But the interesting thing about juggling for me is that when you try and learn to juggle at the beginning, of course, when you watch someone like me juggling, you go, oh my gosh, it looks really easy. And then you try and have a go yourself. And of course, then you find it's really, you perceive it to be almost impossible to do it. And then finally, if you stick to it, because most people, once you had the recipe of juggling, because juggling is like most things in life an illusion, once you had the recipe of juggling and you understood the process of it, and if you just practiced for 1 minute a day for a couple of days, you'd be a juggler.
I love where you're going with this, and essentially what you're saying is, and it doesn't matter what the skill set is, but let's take it in the context of what we're talking about right now, relationship building. When you see somebody else who's really, really good at talking to people, really good at connecting to people, you think that this is a skill beyond your own measure. But what you're saying is actually it's an illusion, because what they've done is practice. They're following a recipe that works now because they've been practicing dedicationally. Is that what? I'm not even sure what the word is.
I can take that word. I can understand the word.
It doesn't even roll off my tongue. It doesn't feel right. But because they're so dedicated about what they've been doing, learning this recipe, learning this craft, they make it look easy eventually. So a new starter looking at them would say, wow, I can't do that. But what you're saying is, well, of course you can. You just learn the recipe, you commit to it, you're dedicated to it, to learning the art, and eventually you'll get good at it without even realizing.
So the actual program is actually you kind of got ahead of me there. So it's actually mastering the art of service. So mastery of something. So we talk about mastering the art of service, and it's mastering the art of communication. There's a very interesting word, because it is about mastery, and mastery comes from practicing something. And I think service also is an art. We have a recipe for handling a complaint, a conflict. I have a recipe for conflict. So it's kind of strange. So again, if you watch me dealing with conflict in a complaint situation, you would go, oh, he's just following a recipe.
Yeah.
If you knew what the recipe was, if you didn't know what the recipe was, you'd go, wow, that guy's a genius. How's he basically taught that customer back?
A bit like your stage magicians, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's all tricks, it's all illusion, but actually, as an onlooker, you think, wow, how did that happen? It's literally magic. So I love what you're doing there with staff in terms of how they build those relationships, build that trust, and it is all about that for me. How they build that trust with customers. And I almost feel like I want to jump on a plane now. Obviously, it would have to be an Etihad plane to go to the UAE to come and visit Etihad and see what it is that you're doing around the culture. Because if that's what you're doing with your frontline staff, talking to clients and customers, what would the culture look like, and what is it that you're doing with the culture now to create an organization? It's a huge organization, but an organization that's full of trust, confidence, and relationship building. What could you just share with us very briefly? What sort of stuff you're doing over in Etihad there?
Well, there's four things I think is really, really important. First of all, it's about clarity. So my job, like everyone else in Etihad, my job is to bring the world to Abu Dhabi. Number one, so that gives clarity of purpose, and perhaps we can touch on that a little bit in 2 minutes down the road here. So I think giving people as much clarity and alignment and helping them understand what we're trying to do is absolutely fundamental. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you create that clarity and you create that direction, you understand, you point to north and you help people understand where north might be, actually, then it's much easier to give them feedback. One of the bigger challenges I think we all have in life is that we get frustrated with other human beings, and we're not comfortable giving them feedback. And one of the challenges, reasons we're not comfortable giving people feedback is, in my mind, that we're worried about an emotional response to the feedback. We're worried that someone's going to cry or be upset or get angry with us, or maybe something even worse than that. So therefore we kind of back away from it.
Yes.
My experience of giving feedback to people, and definitely receiving feedback, is a couple of things. If I have a lot more clarity, if before the feedback is given to me, I was clearly explained to me what I was supposed to be doing. Of course, when I'm not doing it, then it's much easier for me to accept it. The big challenge with feedback is that most people aren't really clear what they're supposed to be doing, and therefore, when you give them feedback, they go, "Well, no one ever told me that. Why didn't someone sit down and tell me that?" So I think the clarity and the feedback are really, really important. On a personal level, probably one of the best tips I could ever share with you, Carl, is if people are giving me feedback, I just think about one thing, is that a perception that I want that person to have? Because for me, that's a simple choice. Do I want that person to think that about me? Do I, is that a perception I want them to have? If it is, fine, crack on. I don't need to do anything about it. But in most cases, I think, well, probably I don't want them to have that perception. So how would I sort of shift that? How would I change that perception? We all see the world through our own lenses. So therefore, I think we need to really kind of be aware of that. But definitely responding in an emotional way to feedback is a very bad game, primarily because as soon as you respond in a negative way or in an emotional way to feedback, of course, you just close down that massive gift. And I would say I don't know whether I'm successful or not, but one of the things that's probably made me more successful in my career is being open to feedback and actually not responding in an emotional way to it. I think that's really important. So definitely number one, helping leaders be better with communication and impact and clarity around how they're communicating. Number two, definitely working on their ability to give really candid, feedback to team members. And also we have a big thing called shukran, and that's just saying thank you to people. So that's really. Number three is it's back to my comment earlier. My job is to bring the world to Abu Dhabi, like everyone else in Etihad, and that for me is really important. So we talk a lot about what I would call input versus output. So that's as an employee, do I understand the contribution that I am making to the greater good of our goal, which is of course bringing the world to Abu Dhabi. So do I understand how I'm contributing to that? And that's that's the NASA story, which we've all heard a million times. But that's the cleaner, explaining to Kennedy that his job is to, send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth. Because he felt responsible for that. So therefore, he's giving that discretionary effort, and he feels part of that massive multi-trillion-dollar mission. If the team member understands, if I understand the role I'm playing within the organization, it drives my responsibility, which is I understand how I play on the team and the position I'm playing in the team and the importance of that particular position, be it under the wing, above the wing, cabin crew, flight deck, patrol, dispatch, whatever it might be. So I think that's really, really important. And then the fourth thing is just that sense of learning and growing with us. So the more that you can give accessibility to that and you can give people options, I tend to be really opposed to making people do things. I just don't think it works. I think it's a waste of dollar. So when people are talking to me, I said, we want to try and, people obviously ultimately need to make a choice, so they want to take a journey. So that choice is driven by accessibility, making it easy to get access to learning and growing, and talking about why it's important to learn and grow. So we tend to avoid the areas of like, you must do this, Kul, or else I'm going to punish you, because people need to make up their own mind. So long way of answering that question, but 4 things, nice and simple. Clarity, number 1. What are we asking our people to do? Number 2, are we brave enough, courageous enough to give people feedback? So that's number 2. Number 3, can we help our team members understand the role they play within the organisation? And in our case, bringing the world to Abu Dhabi. In the cleanup at NASA's place, in sending a man to the moon and returning him to Earth. And then finally, are we able as leaders to be able to help people kind of take and grow and give them the responsibility and the opportunity to grow with them?
Nice and simple. Very clear strategy, hits all the elements that I would expect from an organization that is devoted and committed to this. It certainly has some resonance with our new program, the Human-Centered Leadership Program, that we're taking out to organizations. I'm glad to see that there is an organization out there that is really, really committed and no doubt led by yourself, Andrew, for all the great work that you do. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I've really, really enjoyed it. And thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, and anything you need from me ever, Kul, or anyone who's ever listening to this, just reach out and ask. I'm genuinely want to help people, so please feel free to call.